The man I once thought was my closest friend turned out to be the most dangerous person in my workplace, and I was the one who ended his career. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how a quiet coworker became a bully, a creep, and a fraud, and how I made sure he never worked in our industry again. When I first walked into global tech, I felt like I had stepped into another world. I was 24, fresh out of my probation period with my outsourcing company, and finally getting the chance to work for one of the most respected clients in the country. Global Tech was famous, and everyone I knew, from my parents to my neighbors, spoke about it with admiration. Getting placed there felt like a badge of honor. The workload was brutal. We were expected to handle clients across time zones, balance reports, and manage endless deadlines. But the people? They were wonderful. Most of my new coworkers were older than me, some in their late 30s or 40s, and they treated me with warmth. They called me their little sister, helped me whenever I got stuck, and even slipped me snacks during long nights at the office. It felt like a family I was lucky to join. And then there was Martin. At first, Martin didn't stand out. He was older, late 40s maybe, with thinning hair and a quiet, withdrawn personality. Unlike me, who could chat and laugh with almost anyone, Martin kept to himself. He arrived at work on time, did his tasks, and left without much small talk. I assumed he was just one of those people who preferred to stay in their lane, and honestly, I respected that. Not everyone needed to be social. Some people just came to do their job and go home. Back then, I never would have guessed how wrong I was. When the pandemic hit, everything changed overnight. One week, we were sitting together in the office cafeteria, laughing over cheap coffee and microwaved lunches, and the next, I was working from my tiny apartment, staring at spreadsheets on my laptop for 12 hours a day. The silence was deafening. I lived alone, and besides the occasional video call with my mom and late-night chats with my boyfriend at the time, I barely had any human interaction. I didn't realize how much I relied on the small moments, passing by a coworker's desk, exchanging smiles in the elevator, sharing a joke over snacks, until all of it disappeared. That's when Martin surprised me. One afternoon, I got a message from him on our office chat app. It was just a small question about a client file. Nothing unusual. But then he followed up with, "By the way, how are you holding up? This work-from-home thing is driving me crazy." I blinked at the message, half surprised. Martin, the man who barely said more than a polite hello in the office, was suddenly starting a conversation? I replied, and from there the chats became more frequent. At first it was about work, deadlines, clients, system glitches. But then it expanded into casual talk, favorite movies, how we were both coping with isolation, random memes he'd send me late at night. I'll admit it, I was grateful. At a time when loneliness felt like a heavy blanket pressing down on me, Martin's chats gave me some sense of normalcy. I began to think maybe he wasn't just that quiet older guy at the office. Maybe he was actually a decent person. Sometimes, though, he'd make jokes that felt off. Things like, "Back in my day, women knew how to keep men happy," or "You millennials take everything too seriously." I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just a generational gap. My mom made comments like that sometimes too, and I figured Martin didn't mean any harm. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention. Because once the pandemic eased and we were called back to the office, I realized the Martin I had befriended online was not the man who showed up in person. When restrictions finally lifted and life started crawling back to normal, I thought going back to the office would feel like coming home again, but instead, I got bad news. Global Tech, the client I had poured my energy into, was downsizing. The pandemic had gutted their business, and entire departments were being cut. For weeks, we all lived in fear of the dreaded email that would tell us our assignment was over. I still remember the weight in my stomach the day my manager called me. For a second, I thought it was the end of the line. But instead, she said, "Claire, we're moving you to another client, Brightwave Solutions. They need people fluent in English. You're one of the few we can count on." Relief washed over me. I wasn't being cut. I was being saved. And then she added, Oh, and Martin will be joining Brightwave too. At the time, I didn't mind. In fact, I thought it might be a good thing. At least I'd have one familiar face in a brand new environment. What I didn't know was that this fresh start would turn into a nightmare. Brightwave Solutions was nothing like Global Tech. Where Global Tech had been filled with seasoned employees, Brightwave was dominated by Gen Z hires, energetic, ambitious, and glued to their TikTok trends. Suddenly, at 24, I went from being the baby at Global Tech to one of the older employees. It was intimidating at first. The pace was fast, the culture was loud and youthful, and I worried I wouldn't fit in. But Brightwave also had a refreshing energy. People were innovative, collaborative, and most importantly, supportive. Well, most people, Martin, on the other hand, was thrilled. He acted like he had just been given a second youth. While I quietly tried to adjust, Martin strutted around like a man reborn, soaking up the new environment like it was his personal playground. Our new team leader, Olivia, was everything you'd want in a manager. She was in her early 30s, approachable, patient, and had a way of making even the most nervous new hire feel comfortable. Everyone respected her. She was the kind of leader who earned loyalty without demanding it. And that's when Martin began to change. At first, it was subtle. He talked more, joked more, and tried to join group conversations. But within days, his behavior crossed a line. I'd see him leaning a little too close to the younger women, throwing compliments that felt uncomfortable. Wow, you look amazing in that dress. Makes you look older. In a good way. You Gen Z girls have all the energy. Wish I was your age again. He wasn't just saying this in our division. He roamed the office looking for an audience, and then the stories started. Martin would brag about his so-called glorious past, how he was rich in his hometown, how he had multiple servants, and this part still makes me shiver, how he had supposedly slept with them all. He laughed while telling it, as if exploiting people who worked for his family was some kind of badge of honor. The women in the office stopped laughing. Some of them started avoiding him altogether, but no one reported him. In our culture, reporting harassment wasn't common. People just tolerated, ignored, or avoided the problem. I told myself maybe he was just socially clueless. Maybe he didn't realize how he sounded. But when he turned his attention to me, the doubt vanished. The friend who once made me feel less lonely during the pandemic began making me the butt of his jokes. He mocked my weight, my skin, even the fact that I wasn't married yet. He'd do it loudly in front of others, pretending it was all harmless fun. At first, I tried to shrug it off. But when I saw the way my coworkers' faces tightened, the way some of them even defended me angrily, I knew it wasn't just me being sensitive. Martin was becoming a problem, and I had only seen the beginning. That flicker in Martin's eyes haunted me. It wasn't the look of someone who had made a mistake and felt guilty. It was colder than that, sharper, like I had just challenged him in a game I didn't even know we were playing. At first, the changes were subtle. Emails where my name mysteriously disappeared from the completed byline. Meetings where he'd interrupt me mid-sentence, casually steamrolling my points and rephrasing them as if they were his own ideas. The worst part? People seemed to listen to him. When I spoke, it was like background noise. But when Martin repeated the same words in his steady, commanding tone, heads would nod in agreement. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just being sensitive. But deep down, I knew better. The real punch came during a client pitch. I had worked late nights putting together the entire presentation. Research, design, talking points, everything. The morning of the pitch, Martin walked into the conference room, took one look at the slides, and said smoothly, "Thanks, Claire. I'll take it from here." And he did. He presented my work like it was his masterpiece. I sat there smiling politely, my hands trembling under the table. The client loved it. Our manager congratulated him, and I felt invisible. That night, I lay awake replaying everything in my head. I remembered the pandemic chats, the late-night memes, the way I had started to think maybe Martin was different. Maybe he was someone I could trust. But trust? Trust was slipping away fast, and then came the whispers. A colleague pulled me aside one day, her voice hushed. "Claire, I don't know how to tell you this, but Martin's been saying things about you. That you're inexperienced. That you're careless. He even hinted that you only got your role because you're, young and pretty." My stomach twisted. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, because this wasn't just about stolen credit anymore. This was about my reputation, my career, my name, and Martin. He wasn't just fumbling to adapt anymore. He was sharpening his knives. At first, I thought maybe I could reason with him. One afternoon, after another meeting where he accidentally claimed ownership of my work, I asked him to stay back. My voice was calm but firm as I said, "Martin, I'd appreciate it if you gave me proper credit when I contribute. It's starting to feel like my work is being overlooked." He tilted his head, smiled faintly, and said, "Claire, you're overthinking this. We're a team. It doesn't matter whose name is mentioned as long as the work gets done. A team. That's what he called it. But somehow, I was always the one doing the heavy lifting, while he collected the applause, and then the gaslighting began. Whenever I made a suggestion, he'd sigh dramatically as though I had said something foolish. If I corrected an error in his reports, he'd laugh and say, "You must have read it wrong, Claire. Maybe you're too tired." Sometimes he'd even make small jokes in front of others. "Careful. Claire's a bit forgetful today." Claire tends to stress over the little details. Everyone would chuckle, and I'd force a smile, but inside I felt myself unraveling. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining it? That was the brilliance of Martin's tactics. He didn't attack me outright. He made it subtle, small enough that if I complained, I'd look paranoid. The final straw came during a performance review. My manager, Mr. Dalton, glanced at his notes and said, "Claire, I've heard concerns about your consistency. Martin mentioned you sometimes miss deadlines or get confused with priorities. Is that true?" My jaw dropped. "Deadlines? Me?" I was the one who stayed up past midnight to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the seed of doubt was already planted. I could see it in Dalton's eyes. That night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, exhaustion carved into every line of my face. I had worked so hard, given so much, and somehow I was being painted as the unreliable one. And then it hit me. Martin wasn't fumbling anymore. He wasn't adapting poorly. This was deliberate. A game. A cruel, calculated game. And if I didn't figure out how to fight back, he was going to win. By the end of that quarter, I was running on fumes. Every day felt like walking through a minefield. One wrong step and Martin would twist it into proof that I was incompetent. He was relentless, always smiling, always calm, while quietly setting traps I didn't see until it was too late. One morning, I arrived early to prepare for a major client meeting. I double-checked the slide deck, polished my talking points, and made sure everything was perfect. But when the meeting started, the slides on the screen weren't mine. They were altered. Half-baked data, sloppy formatting, errors I would never have allowed. And Martin? He leaned back in his chair, watching as the client frowned. Then, with a smooth voice, he said, "Apologies. Claire must have mixed up the files. Don't worry, I'll walk you through the corrected version." The room went cold. My cheeks burned. I wanted to scream, to stand up and say, "That's not my work." But the damage was already done. Afterward, I confronted him. "You swapped those files, didn't you?" My voice shook with fury. He raised his brows, all innocence. "Claire, you're exhausted. Maybe you uploaded the wrong version without realizing? It happens. Don't beat yourself up." Gaslighting again. But this time I felt something snap inside me. It wasn't just the humiliation in front of the client. It was the pattern, the stolen credit, the whispers about my competence, the carefully staged mistakes, and now, deliberate sabotage. That night, I broke down. I cried until my chest ached, my laptop glowing on the desk beside me. For weeks I had doubted myself, wondered if maybe I was slipping. But no, this wasn't about me failing. This was about Martin making sure I failed, And for the first time, my tears hardened into something sharper. Anger. I realized I had a choice. I could keep suffering quietly while Martin destroyed my career piece by piece, or I could fight back. But if I was going to fight, I had to be smarter than him. If Martin wanted a war, he was going to get one. But I wasn't stupid. I couldn't just accuse him outright. He was too smooth, too careful. If I confronted him without proof, I'd look paranoid, maybe even unprofessional. That was exactly the trap he wanted me to fall into. So I decided to play his game, quietly, patiently. The first step was documentation. Every email, every chat, every version of a file, I saved them all in a private encrypted folder. When he accidentally sent me work to finish, I made sure to respond with polite but clear acknowledgments like, "Here's the task you asked me to complete for you. Martin." If he tried to twist things later, I'd have the receipts. Next, I began recording meetings. Brightwave had a feature that allowed teams to auto-record for note-taking purposes. Nobody questioned me when I enabled it. It just looked like I was being extra diligent. But in those recordings, Martin's little jokes and subtle digs were preserved, word for word. The third step was allies. Quietly, I reached out to coworkers I trusted. I asked casual questions, testing the waters. "Have you noticed Martin sometimes takes over projects?" Most hesitated at first, but slowly the truth slipped out. I wasn't the only one he had undermined, just the one he targeted most. And then came the final layer, patience. Martin had a pattern. He couldn't resist showing off, couldn't resist trying to outshine me. All I had to do was set the stage, let him walk into his own trap and watch him hang himself with his arrogance. For weeks, I kept my head down, pretending to be rattled, pretending to stumble, let him believe he was winning. Inside, though, I was steady, focused, because I knew, when the moment came, I'd be ready. And Martin wouldn't even see it coming. The opportunity came on a Tuesday morning, ordinary on the surface, but I felt the storm brewing underneath. Our division was presenting quarterly updates to senior management. It was the kind of meeting that made or broke careers. Martin, of course, saw it as his stage. He swaggered in with his usual grin, already rehearsing his performance. I had been planning for this moment for weeks. When it was our team's turn, Martin took control like always, speaking as if the entire project had been his vision. He flipped through slides, showering himself in credit, throwing in little quips about support from Claire as if I were his assistant. I let him go on, let him bask, let him think he had the upper hand. Then came the question from the VP. "Martin, can you walk us through the documentation process?" "Who handled the technical side?" Martin hesitated. "Just a flicker, but I caught it." He didn't have the answer because he hadn't done the work. That was my cue. "Actually," I said smoothly, "I can explain. Since I handled the full technical process, I prepared a detailed log for reference." I shared my screen. On it, a perfectly organized folder. Every task, every timestamp, every communication. My name stamped across each submission. And, for good measure, a few of Martin's delegation emails, with his instructions clearly passing the work off to me. The room went silent. Martin tried to laugh it off. "Well, you know how teamwork is. Claire and I collaborated." But I didn't let him wriggle out. I clicked the recording. His voice filled the call. "Claire can finish this. She's got time." Followed by chuckles. Then another, "Relax, I'll make it look like I did the heavy lifting." No one notices these things. You could practically feel the oxygen leave the room. Martin's face drained of color. He tried to talk over it, but the VP raised a hand. "That's enough. Claire, thank you for clarifying. It's very clear who's been leading this work." The rest of the meeting, every question was directed at me. Martin sat there silent, his confidence evaporated. When it ended, the VP gave me a sharp nod of approval. "Excellent work, Claire, truly." Martin didn't even look at me as he logged off. And that was the moment I knew he was finished. The trap had been sprung. Now all that was left was watching Martin unravel. The very next day, whispers began circulating. Management had quietly pulled him into a performance review meeting. People said his voice carried down the hall, defensive, desperate. his charm cracking under pressure. By the time he stormed out, red-faced and trembling, the office already knew something was wrong. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence around him was loud enough. Within a week, he was removed from our projects. His name vanished from team schedules. By the end of the month, his desk was cleared. Officially, the company line was voluntary resignation, but everyone knew the truth. Martin had been forced out. The same man who once strutted through the office, mocking me, cornering women, acting untouchable, was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. And me? I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. My work was recognized, my voice carried weight, and Rose, my manager, began trusting me with leadership tasks. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't fighting to prove my worth. I was standing in it. The women he'd creeped out? They started smiling again, relaxing in the break room, laughing without looking over their shoulders. My gay coworker, the one Martin had harassed in secret, quietly pulled me aside one afternoon. He didn't say much, just, "Thank you." That was enough. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about Martin's downfall. How someone could go from friend to monster, how power and ego could twist a person. But mostly, I thought about what it taught me. That silence is not weakness. That revenge doesn't always have to be loud. That sometimes the smartest move is letting someone dig their own grave, while you simply hand them the shovel. My name is Claire, and this was the story of how I turned a bully, a creep, and a fake friend into nothing.